I am back this week, myself and my Bantu nuts, with another tutorial. And in this one, I'm going to be showing you guys how to create this really beautiful draped slash wrap skirt. It is this piece right here that has a pleated detail on this side and more pleating on this side as well, a nice wide waistband and a sort of midi length. You have the freedom to really customize the pattern to your liking. You can make it longer, shorter, you can make it even more fitted on your body. You could also create this pattern for a woven fabric, because I did it for a knitted fabric that has stretch. So just keep that in mind. But if you'd like to see how I made this skirt, I'm so like impressed with the outcome, because I tend to run away from stretchy fabrics, but for a first attempt, I'm not mad. I'm actually not mad. So if you'd like to see how I make this set, make sure to keep on watching. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Subscribe and join the DIY fam if you haven't already. Did I say DIY fam? Sorry. The K-Divas fam if you haven't already. And without further ado, let's jump straight into this video. For this skirt, I'm going to be working with the following materials. The fabric of choice I'm using today is this jersey scuba that has some body to it. I have about 2 meters here. I also have a matching zip just in case, matching thread, a small fabric, and paper scissors, my tape measure, my marker pen and pen as well. I also have my set square and pattern master, which will be helping me to draw the patterns to make this skirt. And then I have written down my measurements, which you can see here, and I also have some pattern paper to create the sewing pattern for this skirt. So the design is a somewhat wrap slash draped. I had to drape this first on the mannequin to get an idea of how to create the pattern, and after sort of doing this quickly with scraps of fabrics I had in the studio, I got an idea of how many pieces I needed to make, how much material, as well as where I would be applying my slash and spread method, because that's how I'm going to be adding the volume that this skirt has on the side to a basic skirt pattern. So this is what the draped piece looks like, and I'm going to be going ahead to create the sewing patterns. However, you will need the following measurements. You need to measure around your waist, around your belly, around your hip, and decide on how long you want the skirt to be, as well as how fitted you want it to be around the hemline. So once you have your measurement ready, the first thing I'm going to be creating is the waistband, because I sort of like to start from the top and work my way down. So for the waistband, because I'm using a stretchy fabric, I'm going to be marking quarter of my waistline measurement minus 1 inch. So my fabric is stretchy, and that 1 inch I'm taking away is going to allow the fabric to stretch to fit my body. So after marking that, I squared the line across, and from that line I am marking 4 inches down. This is going to be the width of my waistband from my waistline downwards, and along that point I'm going to be marking a quarter of my around belly measurement minus 1. So the distance from my waistline to my sort of belly button area is roughly 4 inches, which is why I decided on 4 inches width for my waistband. I didn't want it to be too wide, but at the same time I wanted it to be nice and, you know, a statement piece, if I do say so. I'm just going ahead to add my grain line, my annotations, as well as my seam allowances. And for this waistband pattern, you need to cut 2 pairs for the skirt. So once you're done with that, this is what the pattern should look like once you've cut it out along the seam allowance line, and that is the first pattern piece. The second one I'm going to be working on is the main skirt front pattern, and I've gone ahead and folded about a meter of pattern paper like this, so I have a fold. So from that folded line, I am marking a quarter of my around belly measurement, squaring that across because that is going to be connected to the waistband that we just created. Now from that top line, I marked 5 inches below, and that's going to become my hip line. and I'm squaring this across like so, because along this line I'm going to be marking 1/4 of my hip measurement minus 1. So once that is drawn in place, I'm just going to extend the line across like this, and then from the top I'm going to be marking my skirt length, which is 21 inches. It ended up being about midi length for me, but you have the freedom to change that if you want to. You can make it longer or shorter. So I'm going now to connect that around belly point to my hip, and I'm going to be marking my hem width, which is 8 inches, because I wanted to taper in towards the hem of the skirt. I'm just going to connect the hem to the hip, making sure to curve around my hip, because it's not a point there, it's more of a curve. So now that we have this main pattern for the front done, I'm going to be cutting this out, and we're going to be slashing and spreading, which is my favorite technique of pattern making. If you follow me long enough, you should know this by now. So now that we have our full front piece, I'm going to be going ahead to draw in my slash lines. So I want a total of about 4 to 5 pleats along this side of the skirt, so I'm just marking 5 points that are 1 inch apart each. So I'm just making my way down the side seam like so, with the help of my tape and my marker pen, and then I'm going to be drawing a diagonal line that goes from one side to the other side. I decided to slant this. You can make yours straight if you want to, but I just decided on a diagonal, like slashing method for this design of the skirt. So the distance between the slash lines on the other side is about 1.5 inches, so it's slightly wider as I make my way to the other side. So the next thing I did for the front was I drew in an asymmetric hemline for the front, because I wanted that sort of peekaboo effect on this particular piece of the skirt, and I like to always do things like this freehand first before going back in to refine the lines with my pattern master and a pen, and then cutting it if I am happy with the shape. So I'm just going ahead to cut out the hemline of the front skirt, and then I went ahead to cut my slash line starting from the left hand side, working my way to the right hand, and just cutting right until the edge. I'm going to repeat this for all of the slash lines, so you have something that looks like this. Next up, I spread out some more pattern paper, and we're going to be spreading our panels by about 2 inches. I started from the bottom here by just taping down this last panel like so, and then I'm going to be measuring the distance between this last panel and to the one next to it, and the distance is about 2 inches. So once I have spread it in the way that I'm happy with, I go ahead and tape down the panel onto the pattern paper that is underneath, and I basically repeat this for all of the panels that this pattern has. This way I'm adding volume to that side of the skirt without distorting the other side or the hemline. So once I'm done spreading all of the panels like so, I'm going to go ahead and connect the side seam for this side that I spread using my pattern master. I'm just going to draw in a nice curve that goes from the waistline all the way to the bottom of this edge like so, and then after doing this, add my 1 centimeter seam allowance, add my grain line, add my annotations, because for this particular pattern you only need to cut 1 for the front. Even after adding the seam allowance, make sure to extend the points where the pleats for the spread side is, because when you cut this pattern onto fabric, you want to be able to cut notches to know where you're meant to pleat on this part of the garment. So once we're done with that, the next thing we're going to be working on is the other front panel, which is on the left hand side. For this, I essentially just made a rectangle that measured 12 inches across like this and measured 21 inches length, because that shape is going to be sort of pleated onto the left hand side of the skirt. But to shape it slightly better, on one side I marked 5 inches downwards to indicate my hip point, and then I curved it inwards along the hem like so, so it sort of mimics the shape that the side seam has along this side of the skirt. So I'm just going ahead to connect the hip to the hem like this, add my annotations as well as where I'm going to be actually pleating, because once I have those points on the pattern paper, once I'm cutting my fabric, I know where I need to cut my notches, and that helps me to pleat accurately. So the pleats are roughly 2 inches wide and they are spaced by 1 inch, because when there is a space between them, they don't overlap in a way that makes it bulky along the waistline. So I'm just marking my pleat points like so, and I'm just going to quickly drawing what points are meant to be pleated and what points are sort of like the space between the pleats. And after doing that, I know this pattern is ready to be cut out and I can go ahead and work on the next piece. So I'm just going to grab my paper scissors quickly and cut out this pattern piece, and once I'm done cutting this out, I know I'm done with all of the pieces for the front of the skirt, and I can go ahead and work on the back pattern pieces. For the back skirt pattern, I went ahead to fold pattern paper in half like so. So we have a folded edge along that center back line. And like we did with the front, I am marking 1/4 of my around belly measurement -1, squared it across. And I'm just going in here to mark 5 inches below, which is going to become my hip line. And along this line, I'm going to mark 1/4 of my hip measurement -1 inch. That will connect together. And then I'm just going in here to mark the skirt length, which is 21. Just remember to add your seam allowance, which is roughly 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch, depending on what you like, as well as the skirt hem width, which is 8 inches. For the back length, I decided to do an asymmetric hemline, which meant that the center back dipped in to 24 inches and then the side was still at its original 21. So I knew when I connected the bottom of that side to the bottom of the hem along the back, I ended up with a hemline that sort of curved outwards and became longer towards the center back of the skirt. So I went ahead to add my seam allowance, my grain line, annotations, and before you cut out this piece, just make sure to measure along that side seam to ensure that it is the same length for the front as it is for the back. So I've gone ahead to cut out my back pattern piece. This is what it looks like. I'm not going to be having a seam on the center back. It's just going to be one piece. So these are all of the pattern pieces. I ended up with 4 in total. And once you're happy with your pattern, you can go ahead and cut these pattern pieces onto your material of choice. Just remember that this pattern is made for stretchy fabric, so whatever fabric you pick should have some stretch in it for the measurements to work. So I've gone ahead and pinned my pattern pieces onto fabric, and because the main front and the main back are sort of like cut one, I'm just cutting on just one piece of material here. This is not doubled in any way. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut out all of my pieces, my front, my backs, as well as my waistbands, and these are the number of pieces that I ended up with. We have our main front, which has the spread ends on one side. We have our main back, which is just one full piece, and then we have the front left piece, which is going to be pleated on one side on the front, and then we have the waistband, which you would need to cut 2 pairs for. At this point I'd only cut 1 pair, but I went ahead and cut another pair off camera. Now onto the main sewing. The first thing I'm going to be working on here is the front piece, which we slashed and spread, and because I cut the notches indicating where the pleats were, I'm just folding the pleats along the side like this and pinning them down. So once you have all of your pleats folded like so, you know you can go ahead and attach the back and the other front piece as well. So I'm going to grab the front piece that sits on the left hand side that sort of conceals this higher cut side of your front, and I'm going to be pleating in the pleats along the waistline and just pin them in place. So I know once I go to my machine, I can just sort of do a stitch to keep that in place before attaching my waistband. So now that I have those pleats done, I'm going to grab my back piece and I'm going to be placing right sides together of my front pieces to my back, and I'm going to be pinning up the side seams, working my way from the top all the way to the bottom, adding pins when necessary, because I just believe that once I pin things down like this and I go to sew, nothing goes crazy or nothing moves around in a way that I don't understand. So now that I have everything pinned and in place, I'm going to be stitching up the side seams of the front to the back. Because this part was especially thick because of the pleats. I had to take my time stitching this up, so just be mindful of that if you are using a fabric that has a similar weight to mine. After sewing up the side seams, I went ahead to try the skirt on just to check that I like how it fits on my body, and I realized that that left panel that we sort of cut as a straight on one side and slanted on the other side was pulling a little bit at the hip. So I went back and actually cut another piece for the front, and instead of making it curved on the side like so, I just cut a straight rectangle that is a similar shape at the top and at the bottom. I went back and stitched this into the skirt and then tried it on again, and it looked a lot better. It still pulls a little bit at the hip, but it just sat a lot nicer on the leg, on the waist as well. So this is what it fits like on my body. I'm just checking to see that I am happy with everything. If you guys have any tips on how to improve how it sits, make sure to share in the comment section down below. But once you are happy with that, you can go ahead to work on the waistband of the skirt, because that's the next step. So I went ahead and placed right sides together of my two pairs of waistbands, and I'm going to be sewing up the side seams. Once the side seams are stitched in place, I'm going to be putting right sides together and pinning the top of the waistband in place, because we're going to be stitching that close. Because once you stitch that sort of top part of your waistband in place, you turn it inside out, give it a nice press, you have it finished beautifully on that top of the skirt. So now that I have my waistband done, I actually tried this on to ensure that it went over my hips, because I did not just trust the fabric enough. And once I was happy that it went over my hips and it sat nicely on my waist, before I went to join it to the waistline of the skirt itself. So I'm just pinning side seam of waistband to side seam of skirt, added a few more pins, and I'm going to be stitching the waistband onto the waistline of the skirt like so. This was another thick layer to sew, and I just took my time stitching this. My machine has been so good to me, but once it comes to thicker fabrics, it tends to struggle a little bit. So after doing a normal straight stitch all the way across, I went back in and actually did a zigzag stitch that helped to just make the edge of this particular waist seam a lot neater. It actually looks like this was professionally overlocked, but I just trimmed down the seam and then did a zigzag stitch just to finish it off beautifully. So once you are done with that seam, the skirt is finished. I paired it with a top that had hues of purple in it as well. Since we're going out of summer into autumn, I just thought purple was a great color to choose to work with for the skirt design. But I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video all the same. I tend to steer away from knitted fabrics, but for this skirt, I took on the challenge, and I know next time I will do this even better. So if you guys will be recreating this, make sure to tag me on your recreations on Instagram at KimDaveDesigns. And until my next video, have a good morning and afternoon wherever you are. Bye.